Okay, and we are live.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everybody. I am, Hank, so excited. I know I say this all the time. I know I say I'm excited every time we go live because I just like hanging out with you. But I am incredibly excited about this fireside chat because this is by far our most requested fireside chat.
I believe it.
And yeah, and it's for good reason, right? It's an important
Yeah.
topic. It's something that people are interested in, and it's something that every author needs to think about at some point in their
Yes.
writing journey, maybe multiple times. And that topic, since I haven't said it yet in all my excitement, is self-publishing versus traditional publishing. So
Yes.
I'm
Or
just happy to be
or
here.
indie publishing, as
Yes.
is the more popular terminology these
Yes.
days. And I think um, th- that terminology problem probably stems back to some of the really underhanded, dastardly um,
Hmm.
shenanigans that were going on pre-Kindle revolution. And I think we really can thank the Kindle and Amazon by extension um, for really changing the publishing business. And maybe that's a whole different show to talk about. But that there really is pre-Kindle publishing and post-Kindle publishing. It
Yep.
really is a demarcation in the world of publishing.
Yeah, and that's the one time I think you'll hear me thanking Amazon, aside
Right.
from when they send me my royalties. But even then, it's like, oh, it could have been more. You just take your share, but but we're not here to bemoan that, though it is something actually that we'll chat about as we go through this.
Yeah.
I do want to stall for a couple minutes here while we just let everybody trickle in,
Yeah.
because again, this being such a popular topic, I want to make sure that we catch people here. But if you're watching this afterwards, then thanks for joining us. After the fact, we do these fireside chats about every 2 weeks,
Yeah.
and you can check out our channel for the upcoming one. Which, in the vein of stalling for time, we do have another one coming up in 2 weeks from right now, where we're talking about the 3 different stages of an author journey or career,
Yeah.
starting from your first word to bestseller status.
Yeah.
So I'm
And
really
this
looking
might
forward
be
to
a
that.
good time to tell people what the difference is in our fireside chat versus like our office hours. Because both of those shows are just me and you talking, but we kind of approach them a little differently, even though today we actually did discuss a little bit, a tiny bit ahead of time, what we were going to talk about. But normally in a fireside chat, we lob a topic out there, and then Doug and I both come with our best hot takes. And today, a little less spicy because this is something that we wanted to talk about, but I still have really no idea what perspective Doug is going to bring. And
Yeah, you can
I
guarantee it's
can
gonna be a little
guess,
spicy
but
too.
it's just going to be a guess.
I don't think we can give our respective perspectives without a little bit of sass, a little bit of snark. So
That's right. Because that's just who we are.
exactly. That's why everyone comes by.
That's right. That's
All
right.
right. I think we've dilly dallied long enough.
Yeah.
Um, so we'll launch into it, and if it's okay by you, I'll kick us off here.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned at the very top of the show, TW. Welcome to
Careful
the
what
show,
you ask for,
TW.
TW.
Like I said at the top of the show, every author at some point is going to need to make some sort of decision about how they're going to publish. And when it
Yes.
comes down to it, the two big options are traditional publishing, which is going through an agent or publishing house to get your book distributed, or self publishing, which is where you take on most of the hats yourself and find a distributor and do all the other jobs kind of solo. So there's some nuances to all of that, and there are kind of like some subcategories within each one, and some publishers do things differently. But realistically, you as an author have never had more choices about how to get your book in front of people
That's
than
right.
you have today. And you'll have more choices tomorrow, and you'll have more choices than that in a year. Like, the publishing industry is expanding, and to use a term that I've used in some W articles, it's democratizing, because it is giving more power to authors like us.
Yes.
And that's exciting. I love that.
Yes. I
That
agree,
also
and, that there are, as with most anything, there's a tribal nature, that kind of happens around publishing, and you've got the
Mhm,
indie folks over here, and you've got the trad folks over here, and, but like you said, I'm just kinda co-signing what you said, is that right now, what is happening in publishing is the power is being given back to the authors or
mhm,
maybe for the first time the authors really have more choices. It used to be that if you wrote a book and you wanted people to read it, you kind of got pigeonholed in one way or another, and that was just all there was to it. And then all of these horror stories creep up around the gatekeepers and how
mhm.
certain things are allowed to get out to the world and other things are imagine anytime someone is restricting your ability to get your product out, your words, your thoughts. You imagine all the horrible things that come up with restricting those things, and
Um,
you know those things happened, but
yeah.
not today.
Not today. And I do want to be transparent about something, and Hank, I'll invite you to do the same thing after
Yes.
me. But I am a self published author. All five of the books that I have out there are self published, and that is by choice. There's something we'll chat about as we get on here where there was a stigma associated with indie publishing or self publishing, that it used to be a not great thing. Nowadays, self publishing, I believe self-publishing in sales volume actually outpaces traditional publishing. I might be wrong on that, but if I am wrong, then it won't be very long because that segment of the market is growing every year and traditional publishing is shrinking every year. That said, that doesn't mean that traditional publishing is dying. That doesn't mean that I think traditional publishing is bad. I have a lot of friends who are traditionally published authors.
Yep.
I think traditional publishing is a great goal. It's just self publishing is the way I decided to go.
Yeah.
What about
Well,
you, Hank?
Nisha, one of our team members,
Mhm.
is a traditionally published author now. She worked with us a couple of years ago, and she worked with you specifically, mostly on Dabble U articles and stuff. And she, attained her dream,
Yep.
and now she's moved over there, and so she's a member of the Dabble family, and we share in her success a little bit. I like to think anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have indie published or self-published 6 novels. I have, at last count, I think 12 short stories published, mostly in anthologies that were published by small press publishers. Um, and then when my rights to those short stories reverted, I then combined a bunch of those short stories into 2 different collections and indie published those collections uh, of grouped around themes. But these were things that were traditionally published, if you want to
Mhm.
look at it that way, with a small press publisher. And then I sold the rights to them for a finite amount of time, and when those rights reverted, then I was able to self-publish them. So, um,
Excellent.
that was kind of a great example of kind of using both sides of the process there, and, and that's why I'm so, hesitant about this tribalism around indie publishing
Mhm.
versus trad publishing, because really what we need to be thinking about is what is the best process for the author and for that particular work. Um, because at the end of the day, we all want our stories to be read. That's the only reason that we write is we make money on them. That's wonderful. But if no one was reading them, what's the point?
Yeah. And I think for both you and I, Hank, at the end of the day, we want anybody who's watching this, either live with us now or after the fact, to find the best route for them.
Right.
Like that's probably I think the best perk of our job is that we just get to help other authors
Yes.
learn more and figure out stuff. So that's the ultimate goal of this. We're going to provide the information, we're going to provide our opinions. At the end of it, you can decide which path is best for you because there is no objective right or wrong answer.
Yeah. Oh, and I forgot to say, I have another trilogy that is being published by a traditional publisher. The first book is coming out hopefully by the end of this year, and then I also have another book that I'm working on that's probably going to be indie published. So, um, you know,
From our Writing Sprint Wednesdays?
that's the one. That's the one. Yep.
I also want to acknowledge TW posted a question in the chat here. If it's okay with you, TW, I'm going to save that one until we dive a little bit more into self-publishing, which is risky because the last workshop I did where I said we're going to save a question, I ended up losing power after people waited for so long. But we're going to get there pretty soon because I think we can kick this off.
Yeah.
And we're going to start with what is self-publishing and then go into the pros and cons of it.
Yeah.
So self-publishing or indie publishing is really what it sounds like. It is you as the author publishing your own work. You're wearing a whole bunch of hats. You're taking on different roles. That means you're going to be the writer. You're going to be the editor to a degree. You're going to take care of your own revisions. You're going to take care of book design and potentially book cover. What's production is the word I'm looking for. You're in charge of marketing. You're in charge of finding a distributor. You are in charge of everything, or you have to hire outside sources to wear those hats for you.
Yes.
That's where it comes from. Indie publishing is my preferred term. It's funny because if we had spoken 3 years ago, I would never say self-publishing because of an old stigma attached to it.
Yes.
But I think while indie publishing is gaining popularity, people still know the term, and so it's kind of re-entered my vernacular.
Yeah.
But that stigma comes from before what we generally call the Kindle revolution, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Hank, around 2008, 2010 was
Yes.
when that kicked
Yes.
off.
Yes, around 2008, but really kind of the groundswell of attention about 2010.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And so
Going
when
on
we
about
say the
15
Kindle
years now.
revolution, yeah. So when we say the Kindle revolution, we're talking about Amazon making e-readers more accessible, but also giving a platform to self-published authors to distribute via their site.
Yep. And
And that's the big
that was
one.
the missing piece is we had e e-readers, sort of for a while, but there was no, kind of plug and play publishing platform. It was the combination of those 2 things is what changed the world, really.
Yeah, especially with ebooks, because you had authors with their novels, but if you wanted people to read them, you needed to physically get those books to this
Right.
person. And so the distribution and the printing, other order, the printing and the distribution of those books could only occur if you had a print house or a publisher that had a print house. And so with the Kindle revolution, that's what really kicked off indie publishing or self-publishing. Prior to that, if you were to self-publish, generally you were going to what most people refer to as a vanity press, and you were paying all the fees to get a box of your books shipped to you, and that's basically it. You had no distribution, you had no way of getting it out there unless you popped it in the trunk of your car and sold it in a coffee shop parking lot or something, got chased
Yep.
away by the owner. And it was generally seen as a negative thing because back then there was no marketing, there was no like entrepreneurial side of indie publishing. And so really you're just like, I don't want to do the work to get my book to a publisher. I don't want to deal with gatekeepers. I might not have a good enough book for traditional publishing at that time. So I'm just going to print it and say I'm an author because I have a box of books.
Yeah.
That all changed though.
And I know people that have cases of books in their garage, where they went through that whole process and, have the scars to to prove it. Yeah, it's pretty bad. I mean, and another thing, and we traditionally think about novelist, when we talk about that, but sometimes, you would have people that published, self-help books, nonfiction of some sort, and they just didn't either understand the process or didn't, know how to go about that, and they would use that route and get books published, and maybe they were, someone who would speak at conventions or something, and then they would take a box of books. So even though it's very unseemly, on the surface, for some people in certain circumstances, it was something that worked for them.
Mhm.
Almost never in the world of fiction, though.
Yeah. And so you might be thinking, okay, what's the difference between me ordering a bunch of books from a vanity publisher and me putting my book on Kindle Direct Publishing, KDP, or Smashwords, or Lulu, or Ingram Spark.
Right.
And the difference is that we now, because of this democratization that I referenced before, because you can do all of this yourself, now the market and readers are going to be judging the quality of your book.
Right.
Before, if I ordered a case of books and said, "Oh, I'm a hotshot author," no one can dispute that, unless your family says, "No, you're not. You just ordered a bunch of books." Now, if I publish a book and it gets 100 1 and 2 star reviews, that's the market and readers telling me, "Okay, you need to improve your craft." That's our new gatekeepers,
Right.
right? And that's how indie publishing kind of regulates itself to a degree. Um, so before I dive into what I consider all the pros of indie publishing, is there anything you want to add to our
No,
little
no.
introduction spiel?
No, I feel like that if we keep commenting on the introduction,
Yeah.
we're never gonna move past the introduction. So keep this train moving
Keep
forward
it
because
going.
yeah, I think we both have a lot to say about this. So if
Yeah.
we're gonna hit all of them, let's get going.
All right. So, the pros of indie publishing or self-publishing, there are a bunch of them. And for me personally, there are pros, like you get to operate on your own schedule. You can be more flexible. Whereas someone might provide you with a deadline if you have a traditional publisher. You are more, if you're a hobbyist or an amateur writer, you don't necessarily need to stress so much about that, which can work in your detriment, and it can mean your book can be pushed off forever and ever. But that flexibility is something that a lot of people enjoy in indie publishing. One of the other great things is that there are no quote unquote arbitrary gatekeepers. And I think about the chat that you had with Stephen Arian 2 weeks ago now. And he
I think so,
said,
yeah.
yeah, he said the agent that he secured with his book, he was one of 10 that got accepted that year out of 7,000 submissions. And if you hear that and you think that there were 6,990 bad submissions, then you're just being kind of disingenuous, right?
Right.
In that there were undoubtedly some amazing authors that just weren't lucky enough to get picked up, right? They
Right.
didn't have a good enough query letter. They didn't have a strong enough opening, but maybe the remaining 95% of their book was some of the best stuff ever written. We'll never know because there's the gatekeeper in place to stop them from traditionally publishing.
Right. Right.
Right.
And I feel like gatekeeper has a decidedly negative connotation, and I
Mhm.
guess it should. But that doesn't necessarily mean that some guy is standing over here and has a personal vendetta against you. Like you
Mhm.
said, the luck of the draw is a huge part of it. And like you alluded to, maybe it wasn't a strong opening, maybe he didn't have a query letter that grabbed their attention before they ever got to the manuscript. There's so many pieces that could go wrong, and yeah, but
Yeah,
just because there's a gatekeeper doesn't necessarily mean that they're actively against you. It just
correct.
means that they're trying to sift through all of the submissions as well.
Correct. And we can chat more about this in the cons of self-publishing or the pros of traditional publishing, but gatekeepers do help weed out poor writing, right?
Yes.
Of those 7,000 books, I'm sure many of them were not up to publication standards. And so they were kind of picked out accordingly. But there were confidently so many in there that would have been excellent reads for a good amount
Yeah.
of people. And maybe it's just the market wasn't ready for it, or maybe that particular agent isn't interested in these kinds of books, which, do your research when you're going to query an agent, but still, that is something rather arbitrary, cutting this author off from being published. And when you self-publish, you don't have to worry about that. Um,
Right.
Something else that excites me about self-publishing, and really the biggest draw as to why I pursued that path, is because it's so entrepreneurial in how you approach it. You are not just an author, you get to do all these different things, and if you're willing to put in the work, like your destiny is within your control. You get to choose how you market, you get to choose what the book cover looks like, you get to choose when you go live with your email list subscribers, you get to choose what genre you write next, right? But it comes at a cost, and often a monetary cost, if not a time cost as well. But you have that creative control, which is excellent.
Yeah.
And then second last point that I have, normally I don't make a list for these fireside chats, Hank, but I want to make sure I get everything out there for the fine folks watching. You you make more money in terms of percentage of the sales when you self-publish.
Yes.
The
Decidedly more.
yeah, decidedly more. The royalties for self-publishing or indie publishing through KDP, for example, you'll get 70%, up to 70% on ebooks. It's up to, I believe, 40% minus printing costs for paperback, if my numbers are current, as opposed to 5 to 10% with a traditional publisher. Now, the
Yeah.
balance is that it's on you then to boost those sales so that you can take advantage of those higher margins, because a traditional publisher will outmarket you, but you get
Help
more.
market you.
Yes, help. Yes,
Help.
help
Let's
outmarket. Yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah,
I'm jumping ahead, but
yeah. It's tough not to though, because they're kind of
yeah,
tied together.
they are.
Self-publishing rose because of the flaws in traditional publishing, but that doesn't
Yes.
mean traditional publishing is bad. And
Right.
so the last thing on my list is that you can act more quickly as an indie author than you can as a traditionally published one. When you submit, if I were to submit my finished book to a traditional publisher tomorrow, we might see it in 2 to 3 years if they're a larger one. Smaller ones have a little more flexibility. I could feasibly take my first draft from tomorrow, and like some authors, 2 months, it's out in the market and is generating money for them.
Right.
Right. And the same goes if there's a current trend in markets. Like right now, romantasy is really hot. It will probably always be really hot. But let's say there's a specific subgenre. Let's say, fairy romantasy is very popular right now. By the time you write and submit your book to a traditional publisher, that trend might be gone. Hockey romance right now, super hot. In 2 years, nobody might be reading it. But as an indie author, you can write your hockey romance, you can get it out within the year and capitalize on that trend if that's something that you want to do.
Yeah. Or if you write a hockey romance, find that the market no longer supports that, you can change those hockey sticks to wizards
Hmm.
staffs. And, you know,
You have
yeah,
that flexibility.
you have that flexibility.
That's the
Yeah.
name of the game, I think,
Right.
with indie authors is flexibility and freedom if you're willing to put in the work.
Right.
Now, Hank,
Right.
I'm going to cede to you for the cons.
Well, the cons, and I do not have a detailed list of points here, so I'm going to be r- rambling off the top of my head like a crazy person. But the first thing that I think of as a con for indie publishing is, and I think it is a stereotype that's not always a truthful one, that writers are introverts and don't like to, they just want to write words. They don't want to do any of the other stuff. And a lot of times stereotypes are, become stereotypes for a reason. Not always. Sometimes they're unfair, and that's not the discussion I'm trying to have. But sometimes you get tagged with things for a reason, and sometimes people would rather just write the words and have someone else do all the marketing work, the forward facing work, where, here's my book, would you like to buy it? That scares the dickens out of a lot of people. I'm not a great salesman, and I don't like the icky part of sales sometimes, and sometimes you have to swallow your pride and you know and sell your wares. um so that's one thing, is that some people are not comfortable wearing all the hats. The other side of that is there are a lot of hats.
Yeah.
You are the writer. You are kind of a project manager, because you have to think about when you're writing this book. And Great conversation we had the other day with Randy Ingermanson. He talked about one of the things that brought about his snowflake method of outlining was thinking about his target audience, um, thinking about who he was going to sell this book to before he started writing it, and that helped to shape it. So you've got to have that hat on as well. Who's going to be my target audience? Who's going to buy this? Um, yes, Celeste. There's so much work involved. Yes. Um, um, I'm sorry, I've got sidetracked reading
That's okay.
Celeste's comments, and um, so it's a lot of work, and you phrased it a minute ago, Doug, that you get to do all these different jobs,
Hmm.
and yes, when you a lot of times people realize that when they get into the other aspects of the business of writing and publishing, that they actually enjoy it, and that talking about books and talking about your book in particular, it can be very enjoyable, and people dread something until they actually do it, and then they find out they like it. But you've got to be uncomfortable for a little bit. So that's one thing. And then you also touched on the cost. You are ultimately responsible for all of the aspects of the publishing process, and that's your writing. Do you have a computer? Are you going to write on this? So you've got to buy a computer, which everybody has to do that. You've got to figure out what software you're going to use. You've got to get that first draft done. Then you've got to edit it, and you've got to figure out if you're going to utilize beta readers, and you figure out that whole process, and then you've got to bring an editor in, and deal with the editor feedback, and then you've got to get a cover designed. And are you going to do it yourself? Can you use Photoshop? Can you use Canva? There are people that do this for a living. Maybe shop around the internet. Lots of good places that you can find deals on covers, but you got to be a bit of a sleuth to dig around, find the best deals, find someone that you can work with. It's all about relationship building. You're in control of all of this. And to jump ahead, which we, in traditional publishing, um, you are still responsible for a lot of that marketing, but you have help. You have a team there that's kind of guiding you, and you're still going to have to get out there, and you're still going to have to sell your book, but there are people to help you, and there's an editorial staff there to help you. And it's a team effort as opposed to a Doug effort, if you're
Yep.
indie publishing a book.
Mhm.
So you know I would say that the big cons of indie publishing are just to understand what you're getting into. That yes, you have all the freedom, you have all the power, but you also have all the responsibility.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah,
that's
if I could build on those 2 points,
yes,
actually. The first being, if you're choosing to indie publish and you're saying, "I'm going to do these things by myself," you're then taking on the responsibility to say, "I'm going to do them up to a certain standard and, like, the best that I can possibly be," because you're
right,
foregoing a professional doing them.
right,
And I've seen it hurts, it breaks my heart to say this, but I've seen so many indie published books where, like, people have made their own covers and they don't understand color theory, they don't understand graphic design or the tools that they use, and so it could be an amazing book, but because everybody judges a book by its cover, that book
yes,
will not sell. Yeah.
yes,
So, like, there's the technical ceiling that you either need to educate yourself to or pull someone in to help you with, that if you're going to indie publish, like, that's a requirement.
right,
You need to be a professional because you are embarking on a professional endeavor after
yes,
you're done writing this book.
yes,
The other thing is cost, and it will sneak up on you if you let it. One of the things that I want to do for our premium dabblers in the future is a workshop breaking down the cost of self-publishing or maybe writing in general, because when you start factoring in all of these different things to just get out a book, it can be thousands of dollars. As an editor myself, like, I am charging over $1,000 for a copy edit. For line editing, you're probably looking north of two, maybe $3,000. Developmental editing, some books are long enough that you're looking at five figures for a very in-depth developmental editor. If it's your first book, you will never recoup that cost, right?
right,
You need so many books, like double digit books, to make a decent chunk of money as an indie publisher. that it's not worth it to invest $2,000 in a book cover, right? But it's also not worth it to just say, hey, I'm going to make it on a Saturday morning and go with that. You need to find that sweet spot. TW, do you have an exhausted list of all the hats you need in self-publishing? We do have an article on self-publishing. Let me quickly pull it up here. Marketing. We have a handful of articles about self-publishing on Dabble. I'm going to try and find the specific one here, an author's guide to the business of writing. I'm going to drop that in the chat for everybody watching, and we'll include it in the description for anyone watching after this. And now I do want to tackle a couple of the questions. If you don't have any other cons to add, Hank.
No, and I have an answer for Celeste next question
Perfect.
when we get to it. Just a suggestion.
Let's go ahead.
Celeste said, "Would you discourage indie pub if the writer isn't a good business person?" Celeste, what I would do first, if you believe that you have a good story and that this is something that you want to try, there are some great writers groups. There's one in particular on Facebook. It's called 20 Books to 50K. And
They changed their name now.
I think the Facebook group is
Author,
still the same though.
is it? Okay, it's Author Nation is their like group
Is their
name
con?
now.
Yeah. Anyway, the whole theory was Michael Anderle, the guy that founded it, said that he wanted to retire to Mexico, and he said, "I want to be a writer. How much money would I need to make a year to do that?" And he came up with the figure of 50K. And he said, "How many books would I have to write and publish to make 50K?" And he figured, by whatever math, that it was 20 books. And that if he had 20 books always in rotation, that he could make 50K a year, so he could retire to Mexico. That's where the funky name comes from. But that is a gathering place. That's one of the biggest communities of indie writers that I know of. I've been a member for since shortly after they founded. Michael and Craig Martell, the two guys that run it, are good friends of mine, and you can get lots and lots of great advice. You can get networking, get connected with editors and with cover designers, and there's always people in there talking about the latest trends and what's hot, what's not, what things they're working on, and they share success stories, and it's an amazing group. And there are 3 or 4 other groups like that I just can't call the name of off the top of my head, but 20 Books to 50K is a great place to start. Get in there, join the group, just kind of start reading some of the threads and just see, because most of the people in there are not savvy business people, but they're writers who cared enough about their stories and wanting to share them that they learned how to be good business people. And they're people from all over the spectrum, from brand new beginners to very successful people making 6 figures or better a year. And they're, generous with their time. So find a community like that, go investigate, see if you may think you're not a good business person and you don't have the skills, but they might be skills that you can acquire. And it's definitely worth looking into.
I would argue that anybody, unless with extreme exceptions, anybody can learn how to be a good business person in terms of indie publishing, because the pure breadth of indie publishers that are out there that are successful, both from just a readership point of view and an income point of view, they span from stay-at-home moms to professors. Right.
Yes.
And I'm not saying those are on different levels, but I'm just thinking about,
different places
education
in
that people
life.
have, where you are in your life, where you spend most of your day. Like there is no shortage of individuals who have found success as indie authors. And that doesn't mean that they learned it all before they published their first book.
Right.
I don't want anyone here to hear this and think, okay, I can't hit publish until I've mastered every single thing there is, because that's just not going to happen. The industry changes, so you're never going to catch up to everything. But also get that book out there, start establishing some readership, and then you can apply principles back to it to market it better, or it can become part of your backlog or your back catalog as you write more. There's there is no reason you can't figure out this business if you put the time in.
Right. And I'll say this to kind of tag onto that. Um, whether you decide to indie publish or traditionally publish, you will never regret learning more about the industry that you're working in.
Yep.
Because the things that you will learn from the indie publishers will only help you in your traditional publishing journey. I've hosted a podcast for 10 years where we interview authors. Um, Indie authors, traditionally published authors, the whole spectrum. I've never discriminated, you know, depending on how they chose to do it. But what happens for all of them is, even if you're traditionally published, you still have to get out there and hustle and
Mhm.
book podcasts to go on, find places to go talk about your book. The publisher is not going to do all of that for you. They will give you a leg up, and they will give you a team to work with, but it is still your job to sell your book. And
Yeah.
I think that's uh, something that people are disappointed with sometimes when oh, the publisher's just going to do all this for me. They're going to do a lot for you, but there's still a
Not
big
everything.
portion that has to be done by you.
Yeah. I want to hit TW's first question before we move on
Yeah.
to traditional publishing. And that is there such a thing as self-publishing being a platform into traditional publishing? The answer is resounding yes, but with
Yeah.
a bit of a caveat I want to add in there. So, do you mind if I take a swing at this first, Hank?
Go ahead. Go
All
ahead.
right. So self-publishing is a great way to bring like social proof to a traditional publisher. One of the things that traditional publishers and agents are looking for isn't just the quality of your story, but how marketable you are. Because
Yes.
in reality, you are an asset to them. You are a money making asset to them, which
Yes.
sounds clinical and cold, but like,
But
yes, they treat
it,
you like a human being, but
yeah.
they're entering into a business relationship with you. So if you can say, hey, I've published 5 books and I have 100,000 people on my email list and I get 50% open rate and 5% click through rate and all this thing on social and all that, and the 20,000 reviews on one of my books, they're going to look at that and they'll probably start salivating because you've
Right.
already put in the hard work to make yourself a brand and make yourself a recognizable author that they can profit off of while boosting you up.
Yeah.
The other side of it, though, is that once you self-publish a book, with very few exceptions, that book then becomes basically ineligible for traditional publishers to make use of, because
Yeah.
you've already tapped out the market and they don't want to put in the effort to redo this book and re-advertise it and find a new market for it.
Yeah.
I
There
remember I
there
was
are there are a couple of exceptions. Hugh
Yes,
Howey's Wool
of course, yeah.
was self-published and then got reworked. But
Mhm.
Hugh did an interesting deal where he retained all of his ebook rights, and they
Yep.
only published the paperback and I guess audiobook.
Yeah, I
I
guess
can't
so.
remember. Um, uh, but anyway, and now it's a Apple TV show with
Silo.
rave success, and Hugh's doing okay for himself. Um, um,
I
uh,
bet.
yeah, Andy
Long way from
Weir's
selling from the back of his car, right?
right, exactly. Andy Weir, who wrote The Martian, um, originally that was a story that he published on his website, and he only uploaded it to the to KDP because people were harassing him to make it easier for them to get on their Kindle, and so he put it on KDP for 99 cents just so that people could click it and have it automatically go to their Kindle. And
Yep.
then, then that got, went to a huge bidding war from traditional publishers and, became a movie with Matt Damon. And one more time, Matt Damon got stranded out in space and we had to go rescue him. Um,
Was it
so
was it Natasha Preston who started writing on Wattpad and
yes,
then got an agent through that and then it
yes,
was published in its
right.
entirety?
Right.
It's
So while there are books that began as indie published and then that same book found a traditional home, like Doug said, most of the time that thing that you've done before just becomes a calling card for a new work that you're going to do with them, and that the previous work you did is going to get you in the door, and then you're going to do a totally new IP, or
Mhm.
a new series or whatever that goes from there. So um it used to be the thought that if you indie publish, a traditional publisher will never touch you because you're tainted. Then that is 100% not the
Yeah.
truth.
Yeah. And stick around till the very end of the show because we're going to chat about hybrid publishing. And within that hybrid publishing, I want to talk about authors who do both self-publishing
Right.
and traditional. But for now, just a quick recap before we move on to traditional publishing. Self-publishing or indie publishing gives you a lot of flexibility, gives you more freedom, and gives you higher percentage royalties, but it requires a much larger investment of your time, expertise, and money. And it's a lot of work that you have to be willing to do, a lot of hats you need to be willing to wear.
Yeah.
I think that was that a sufficient recap?
I yeah, and I think we beat that horse. No,
I
no,
probably shouldn't do those gestures on.
yeah,
All right,
yeah.
onwards to traditional publishing.
So traditional publishing, if we want to talk about the pros of traditional publishing, and we touched all over this from the previous topic, but like you said, they're so interlaced that we can't help it. The pros of traditional publishing are that you have a support team around you, and that's with your agent, is usually a kind of a first line of help, and then your publisher. You've got an editorial team. You have cover designers. You have marketing people who help you, kind of figure out who your target audience is, how we're going to market this book to that target audience. They're going to help you get your books placed in bookstores. And if you frequent bookstores, you might y- th- being in the Kindle store and being an Audible right now, uh, I would argue are as important, if not more important, especially for some subgenres, um, for visibility. But there's there's something cool about seeing your book on a shelf in a Barnes and Noble, or Books a Million, or whatever your chain is. You can't you can't deny that.
Yep.
So the traditional publisher is there for support. They're there to help you through the process. They are there to um, a lot of times for someone to talk to, if and that's something that kind of gets neglected, is that sometimes when you're working through a problem with your book, with your story, it helps to have that editorial team or your agent or an editor that you can talk through some of those problems. You can get a different perspective on it. Sometimes if you're indie publishing and you haven't kind of built up that support system around you, you lack that that ability to talk through story problems, and those things are just kind of inherent in traditional publishing, just because the machine is so big, that there are people manning all of those positions, and that can be a tremendous help.
Yeah, and I think first of all, it's a well-oiled machine, right?
Right.
Publishers have been publishing for a very long time,
Yeah.
so they know
Hundreds
what
of
they're
years
doing.
in,
Yeah.
in a lot of
Uh,
cases.
but if we reflect back on indie publishing, having that team around you, you don't just have them ready at your beck and call, but you need to be aware enough of your own skills to
Right.
know that you need to seek these people out and bring them into your circle, bring them
Right.
onto your team, which a lot of people don't know. A lot of first time authors, indie authors especially, will think, I don't need a beta reader, or I can catch typos, I don't need an editor. And the result is a book that passes through without those critical lenses. So with traditional publishing, you get that all kind of wrapped up in that nice package for you, and your book is
Yep.
better for
Yep. What do you and we're just kind of hitting the high points here, because I feel like as we talk about other points that'll come in here. But what do you see as the cons of traditional publishing, Doug?
So the cons of traditional publishing for me, at the risk of sounding repetitive from my first point about indie publishing, is that there's a lot of luck involved with traditional publishing, either
Yeah.
luck or connections. If you
Right.
know somebody who knows an editor at one of the big five, congrats, you have an in. Right. That's awesome for you. If you don't know anybody, or if, like we said, your query skills aren't up to snuff, then you can just get unlucky. You can have the best book ever written, and it might not get published because your query letter sucks, or your first chapter needs a little bit of work. That's just unfortunately the way it goes. And because there's so many people writing books now, as there should be. I think it's fantastic that we have all these authors. There's just such a volume getting thrown at agents and publishers that they can't feasibly be expected to understand the quality of every single submission if it's not readily apparent, or if you don't do
Right.
something to make yourself stand out. So just the quality that can fall through the cracks is unfortunate. And there's also the fact that traditional publishers, again, it is a business venture, so they aren't just looking at the quality of your writing. If you're going to a genre publisher, if you're going to like a sci-fi publisher specifically, and you aren't hitting the subgenre that is hot for the next couple of years, you're not as appealing to them as somebody else who is doing that. Sci-fi is a little less fickle in their subgenres. Maybe that wasn't the best example, but if you're writing fantasy, romantasy is outselling epic fantasy right now by the bucketfuls, right? So you have a better shot of getting into a publishing deal if you write romantasy than you do, a Lord of the Rings inspired story. And
Right.
that stinks for some people. The other
Yeah.
thing is that you you earn less royalties, but you will sell more. But very few first time authors actually earn out their advance that they get from their publishers.
Right.
um, and those advances usually aren't that great to begin with. We mentioned Nisha before, and her and I were chatting a couple of years ago now. She had a friend who secured a 3-book deal with a publisher for $100,000. Excellent. You hear that? Amazing. 3 books with a publisher, 6 figures. Amazing. $100,000 over 3 years is $33,000 a year. In most places, that's not a livable income, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so, and the books, at least the first book, will not earn through that advance that it was given. That's just the reality for most people. And
Right.
that caveat on there. And
Yeah.
then the last thing is kind of tacked onto that, where you might sell more, but you don't necessarily earn more. If you sell 1 million copies and you earn 10% after costs, that could earn you, $70,000, which again is a fantastic thing. I love if a book earns, sorry, I would love if a book earns $70,000.
Yeah.
But if in reference to 1 million copies sold, if you had sold that on KDP, if you could earn that sales number yourself, you're pulling in a lot more money than that,
Right.
right? But there is the
Right.
balance.
Yeah. And which brings us to what I find the most interesting now is the rise of hybrid slash small press publishers,
Mhm.
and there is a technical difference in a hybrid publisher and a small press publisher, but I think that they kind of get used interchangeably a lot, but there is a difference. A small press is generally a smaller organization that tends to focus or specialize in a particular genre, especially. I'm thinking Athon Books specializes in science fiction and fantasy. Hip Phoenix Publishing is another small press publisher that I've used for some short stories, and they tend to specialize in speculative fiction or fantasy. The Future Chronicles is another small press that I've worked with, and they tend to specialize in science fiction, speculative fantasy. You get all the benefits of a big publisher where you're not paying for anything; the publisher pays for everything. But they're smaller, more nimble, and more focused on a particular genre or subgenre, and they're very in tune with their audience, as opposed to, and not to pick on them, but like a Harper Collins that is a huge behemoth of a publisher, and they're almost, and even today the big publishers are are kind of broken into smaller houses that specialize in where they can be more nimble. But you get an organization that's so big and they have a hard time pivoting and following trends and things like that. So that's where a small press publisher really shines in their ability to really identify their target audience and really focus on those people.
Yeah, and I like that a lot because, like you said, HarperCollins, they can take their buckets of money and just throw it at the wall and see what sticks,
Right.
and then they sell books.
Right.
Like, they're gonna sell regardless of what they do. They know
Yeah.
where to sell best, they know what's most efficient, but they don't need to be super in tune with, like, smaller communities, and they don't have the mobility or the agility to keep up with trends the same way that a smaller press can. So we
Yeah.
used Hockey Romance as an example earlier. If you go with a small press that can publish your book within a year, you can capitalize on something like Hockey Romance, where you wouldn't be able to do that with one of the big five publishers or necessarily one of
Right.
their smaller publishing houses,
Right.
which I
And
think is
and I
awesome.
have I have heard stories of people that turned in a manuscript and it was 3 years before
Yeah.
that book hit the shelves. And that's not standard. I think a year to year and a half is what people's typical experience
Mhm.
is, but it can go much longer for a variety of reasons. Maybe that publisher is oversaturated in hockey romance right now, and they might have 5 books ready to go, but they really only have room on their roster for 3. So they might hold 2 of those back and wait for the next quarter to bring them out, in hopes that that they're not cannibalizing their own product.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the publisher wants to sell books. So if they hold off a release, it's not to punish an author generally. I can't think of any reason why they would want to punish someone that they have money invested in. But it's usually for a business decision, and that business decision, may seem, like you're being picked on at any given time, but that's
Mhm.
not necessarily the case, but it's still a fact of the business, and
Yeah.
you're kind of at their mercy, at the whims of the market.
Yeah. And what I really like about the smaller presses too is that they offer almost more like a personalized experience. Like, it is,
Yeah.
uh, at risk of using the term intimate, it is a more intimate kind of relationship.
Yeah.
Right? You aren't just a number, you know the people that are there. They understand your books rather than just, knowing your name and the title and, oh, that comes out in 2 years. Like,
Right.
they can offer something that I think a lot of authors are actually looking for. Something that's almost more reminiscent of what pure traditional publishing was 30 years ago.
Right. I have published with 4 different small presses, over the course of the last 10 years, and I have known the owners of each of those small presses, very well, and so
Mm.
you get to, know the people that are making the decisions. You get to know the editors, you get to know all of the support staff in that organization, but it's not some CEO that came over from Pepsi
Yeah.
and is now in the book industry. That these are all people that are in the business because they love the business and not just they're business people looking for the next place that they can, turn a profit.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be really said about that, where you are supporting, in your relationship with a publisher, you are supporting people who are passionate about literature and publishing and about expanding our literary world and getting more readers in, and you're not just a paycheck for them. And I
Right.
think that's really cool. Our world, at the risk of sounding too political, I always got to rein myself back, but our world is becoming so profit driven. Like, look at subscription prices, grocery prices, housing prices. The fact that you can have that kind of smaller experience where people actually care is
Right.
becoming more and more uh, rare, I
Yeah.
guess. Now, what I do want to take a moment to do, and if it's okay with you, Hank, we are going to go over our hour mark a little bit because we have one more quick topic and then a couple
Yeah.
questions I want to touch on.
Let's get it.
But one of the things that I want to mention is that smaller presses like that, smaller and mid-sized size presses, will often be called hybrid publishers because they take the best of both worlds. Like you said, Hank, they take the power of traditional publishing and the agility of self-publishing or indie publishing, mesh them together. Hybrid experience. It makes sense.
Yep.
Technically, by definition, a hybrid publisher is a publishing house whose revenue model is based off of both books that they sell and fees that they charge an author. And one of the things that we always say here is if a publisher is asking you, the author, to pay money for the privilege of making money off of your books,
Run.
turn and run.
Yeah.
That is the biggest red flag I can think of. That's why when we say hybrid publishers, there is the technical scummy hybrid publisher, and then there's the ones that we love that are the small presses and the mid-sized presses that work with you.
Right. Exactly.
So and to be fair, any publishing house will bake in the costs of printing your book into the overall cost, and you get royalties off of that, post-production cost. But a hybrid press is basically a vanity press in disguise if they're saying, hey, you need to pay us X number of dollars per book or upfront. I remember one time before my life here at Dabble, I was chatting with a woman who wanted to sell books for a local charity as like a fundraiser. She wanted to do percentage of each sale. Wonderful. I was so on board. I was so happy to help her out. She showed me the package that she got from her publisher, and there were different tiers of publishing options that she could pay for. And when I'm looking through it, this poor woman, with 80 something years old, she is a World War II survivor, and this publishing house wanted to charge her thousands and thousands of dollars to essentially upload her novel to KDP and sometimes run blog tours for her. It blew my mind. It left such a gross taste in my mouth, and I tried with all my heart to convince her that this is predatory, right?
Yes.
This is gross. So don't be like that. If a publishing house is trying to charge you, then they're trying to make money up front from you. You are no longer an asset, but you are an opportunity. You are something they can squeeze money from, and we don't want that.
And this would be a good place for those writer communities like we talked about, like the 20 books to 50K group. This is a good reason to get involved with a group of writers who can help you spot because like this person you talked about, she was just ignorant. She just didn't know. She didn't understand that that she doesn't have to do this. She can do it herself. But people take advantage of that ignorance, that not understanding, that just not being savvy in that aspect of life. But there are other people who have seen these potholes in the road and can help steer you away from that. And that this is another reason why you never want to just be out here alone, just trying to figure it all out by yourself. Find a community of people who have navigated these dangerous waters before.
Yeah. Now, before we move on to the questions, I do just want to point out as well, building off of TW's initial question about self-publishing as a platform for traditional publishing, the most successful authors by median income, and I believe this info is still accurate, these numbers are still accurate, the most successful do both. They're traditionally published, but they also indie publish or self-publish. And I believe I brought him up before in one of our chats, but Adam Neville, one of my favorite horror authors out there. I started reading him when he was traditionally published, and he actually switched to self-publishing, so he had more control. He started his own quote-unquote press, but that's just the business name for Amazon and other distributors. And he's killing it. He's having a great time. So if you can leverage both, that's where you're most likely to find the most success, because you have the flexibility on one hand, but you have the powerhouse of a publisher on the other. And especially if you're writing different genres, right? If you're writing romance on one hand and horror on the other, your romance publisher does not want your horror.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have anything you want to add to that, or can we jump into the questions here?
Jump in.
Okay. We have here. Celeste asking, how much writing time will it take away going into indie publishing? And I think, Celeste, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're asking how much extra time on top of writing does it take to indie publish, or how much of your writing time do you need to devote to all the other things? And the answer is a lot. The answer is however much you want to get out is how much you put in. But I always say the best way to make more money and find more success as an author is to write
Write
more
more
books.
books. Yeah.
So if you can balance it, say you have an hour for writing every day in like an ideal world, try and find 20 minutes for your indie marketing, your email management, your social media posting if you can. Maybe not every day, maybe every 3 days you get to do that. Or if you have to, take that hour, cut out 15 minutes every couple days, but save the bulk for writing because you,
Yeah.
with all the other hats, you are still an author first and foremost, and more books will make you more successful. But if you ignore those other things, your sales and your fans and your author journey will suffer as a result if you
Yeah.
completely neglect them.
Yeah. And I would say, just to agree with what you said, Doug, instead of carving time out of your writing time, see if there's something else in your life that you could carve some time out of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I understand it doesn't work for some people. Like if we
Yeah.
have a single parent listening afterwards and they're working two jobs and just trying to write on their lunch break, I get it. You don't time is a finite resource that we cannot produce more of. But I would challenge you to think about where you're dedicating your time. So recently, I installed this app on my phone that forces me to choose a timer anytime I open another app. And so it boggled my mind when I first installed it, when it told me how much time I spent on Instagram and YouTube the week prior, and how quickly 5 or 10 minutes goes past when you're just aimlessly scrolling, right?
Right.
So I have reclaimed so much time just in the last couple weeks because I become like objectively more aware about what I'm doing. Don't think, "Oh, I know how much time I'm spending on Instagram or TikTok." You don't. There are people way smarter than us who tune your apps to make it more addictive so that you spend more time on it. That's the
Right.
easiest place to reclaim some time, I think. Uh, all right. We have another question here from No. Uh, so here we go. So no couldn't join us right from the top. That's perfectly fine. But how do you get your books out there when most bookstores will not carry them? What are some other ventures for indie authors to get their book out there? I have some thoughts, Hank, but do you want to take a swing at this one? Because I want to pull up a link as well for no.
Okay. Wow, this is such a we could dedicate an entire hour.
We should.
We should actually on how to promote your book. Um, um, gosh, what would be a good starting place? We've talked before about getting getting involved in communities, especially if you write in a genre that lends itself to, like for instance, and I use this example a lot, cozy mysteries that are kind of focus on a some type of hobby like that. There's lots of culinary cozy mysteries or hobby cozy mysteries, and you can find groups to get involved with on social media where you become a presence in there, and um, and kind of naturally market that way. There are services like BookBub where you can run promotions for your book. There's lots of different ways, but I would say if you don't have money for ads, find places where you can do some self promotion, but not in the shouty "come buy my book" way.
Hmm.
Find communities, find places where you can become part of the conversation that goes on there, and find ways to naturally interject that. And then when you can afford to run some ads, run some ads. You you can't uh, you can't argue with the success of running sales ads for sure.
Yeah. And for the bookstore, I want to focus on the bookstore part specifically,
Yeah.
because if for the most part, if you indie publish through something like KDP, you will not automatically get your books in those bookstores. They have the option, whoever is in charge of ordering has the option to order through Amazon, or Ingram Spark, I think, has a bigger physical bookstore network than KDP does. But
Yeah.
as an indie author, there are some other things that you can do. Specifically, think about consignment. So most bookstores, ranging from your indie bookstore, like locally owned bookstore, to the bigger
Right.
chains, will have somebody on location or managing an area maybe in charge of consignment. And what I've done, actually, what happened is I had a friend who's a very big fan of my books, that went into his local bookstore and said, "Hey, have you heard of this guy?" and showed them my book and left it with them. And the person in charge of consignment read it and loved it. And that got me an into our biggest chain of bookstores here in Canada. Um,
Nice.
but you just kind of do the same thing, but without a friend doing it for you. Walk in, say, "Hey, this is who I am. I've written these books. Here's a review or two from Amazon that shows how good it is. Can I leave a copy with you to see if you'd be interested in me doing a book signing?" Because they love doing live events. And then from there, odds are they'll judge the success of that event and say, "Hey, yeah, let's keep a couple copies on hand here." I've
Yeah.
sold, it's not staggering numbers, but one bookstore has sold, like, in the span of a year, probably upwards of 100 books for me,
Nice.
because yeah, they were, the staff there, amazing. Coles and Owen Sound, if you're watching, excellent. In other places, I've sold 2 books in the span of 6 months, and they said, "Hey,
Yeah.
we can't carry it anymore." Right? It is like that, but you really, to get it into a bookstore, unless you have them ordering your books because you become so popular, you need to get in there, show that you're worth them taking up valuable shelf space,
Right.
and then drop off some books for them to sell. And it
Yeah.
will end up being like, you'll get 40 to 50% of the sale price, which you then have to think to yourself, if I paid $5 for this author copy of my book and I'm only earning $5 from a consignment sale, is it monetarily worth it? Is it worth it to get more local and, get my name out in the community? Like, there are
Right.
pros and cons for that as well.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah, they were hard selling my books. They were fantastic. The person in charge of consignment since left that location, and the books haven't been doing so hot since then. So I miss her quite a
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah. And, more and more, popular these days are used bookstores,
Yep.
where, you know, any city that's, any size at all generally has at least one used bookstore,
Yep.
or, sometimes, like antique shops where they do consignments and things. Those are great places to, go in and introduce yourself and, ask if you could place some of your books on consignment. Those
Yep.
are, any place where people are readers, become friends with the people that run those establishments.
And one more thing, if you distribute through KDP, or it's direct to digital now, not Smashwords or Ingram Spark, your ebook will automatically show up in all of those books. All the
Yes.
big bookstores will
Draft to
automatically get it.
digital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Apple Books will have it. Barnes and Noble, Kobo, Google Play, or whatever Google's books is, like, they will automatically have it in their library. That doesn't mean they'll promote it, but it will be
Right.
there. And for libraries, same thing. They can order it to stock up, and I think KDP has the option to give them a discount or let them stock it for free or something. I can't
Right.
remember. But hop in your local library. Say, "Hey, I'm a local author. Here's my book, or here are my books. Do you mind stocking them?" They'll go. They'll froth at the mouth to get your books in. Libraries love local authors, and
Yes.
they can do events with you. You can set up readings there. You can set up book signings or book launches. Like, libraries are such an underrated friend of indie authors.
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay. I think we've exhausted our list of questions. We're over our usual time, but this was such a requested show. This is such an important show But I hope that everybody who joined us today and everyone who watches this afterwards, I hope you found a lot of value in this. If you have any questions that we didn't cover, leave them as a comment. I'm sure we'll be doing a part 2 to this at some point. I will also take this time to shamelessly plug a couple upcoming events. Writing Sprint Wednesday is now at 2 p.m. Eastern every Wednesday. We've standardized that, so you can join the standard podcast time, as we call it. You can join. Robert will be leading those, barring any incidents, in which case we'll hop on. So, fingers crossed for some incidents, I guess. Yeah. We also have a fireside chat just like this one, like I mentioned at the top, in 2 weeks. That's on the 29th at 2 p.m. Eastern. We're talking about the 3 levels of your author journey. And on top of that, we have on the 30th a Dabble Premium Show Don't Tell workshop. So if you're a premium member, you should have the link to register for that in your inbox. If you aren't a premium member, feel free to join Dabble Premium, and you get instant access to that when we go and do it live. Anything you'd like to add, good sir, before we bid our folks adieu?
I think we have at least did a cursory cover of these important topics, and I feel like we will definitely dive deeper as time goes on. If anyone has any specific questions about anything that we talked about, put them in the YouTube chat here, and Doug and I will go back and check those, and we'll add those to our discussion next time.
Yes, and TW says this was amazing. Thank you both. No, TW, you're amazing. Thank you for showing up, and thank you everybody in the chat who showed up, asked questions, participated, just hung out with us. This has been a blast, and we will see you in 2 weeks.